Radhe Radhe. Today is Saturday, 8th June 2024. And here we are to present to you this recap video for today's Bhagavad Gita study session. As we continue in our journey of chapter 9, we're learning bit by bit, and today covered one verse where we heard, of course, from Sri Krishna, something that all of us will now see unfolding in the next few minutes. Here along with me is Mummy.
Radhe Radhe.
So that verse that I was referring to is chapter 9, verse 11, which is what we covered in class. As always, preceding that was the recap quiz to cover last week's content on chapter 9, verses 9 and 10. Please take a look at the description of this video to get access to the free portal where you can get the slides you're seeing and other relevant material, and you can practice the quiz questions, among other things. So with that, we shall go on to chapter 9, verse 11.
Avajananti mamudha manushim tanumashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram.
So chapter 9, verse 11, the catchphrase here is, I'm right here. That's Sri Krishna telling us, because as we learned in the verse, and you'll see in the next few minutes, that when Sri Krishna descends, and that descension is in his personal form, then unfortunately, deluded persons are unable to recognize him. They cannot recognize the full divinity of his personality, he, Sri Krishna, being the supreme Lord of all beings. As we read out in class, the commentary is very long, but there is some content that's familiar to all of us from earlier chapters, especially some parts of chapter 4 and chapter 7 as well that we showed you in class. Here, in essence, Swamiji tells us that Sri Krishna, just like any other good teacher, is jostling, shaking, driving, Arjun and likewise us as well, out of our complacence. Complacence in this case, that delight or contentment or satisfaction of what? Of our shallow thinking. So driving us, jostling us out of that so that we can get into a deeper state of thoughtfulness. Strong word in the shloka itself, which is mudha. Mudha is dim-witted. So that is what we saw. Sri Krishna uses the word mudha to represent or describe those who deny the divinity of his personal form. We mentioned as well that you may have heard of mudha in Bhaja Govindam, right at the beginning. That comes up there. So keep that in mind as well. We've seen here in the commentary and also connected it in chapter 7, where we gave you the example from chapter 7, verse 13. I think if I take us back there, we'll see that over here. Chapter 7, verse 13, Sri Krishna had earlier used that word deluded as well. Deluded by the three modes of Maya. The people cannot recognize him or know him. And back here then to chapter 9, verse 11, if at all one were to think that Sri Krishna cannot take a personal form, then we are understating the extent of his power and abilities and taking credit for ourselves as being able to have a personal form and not giving God that credit. So that is, of course, something that is absolutely contradictory and incomplete. So God has both the formless and the personal aspect. We saw that with the example of, I'll just say, a vehicle for now. Mummy will talk us through that later. And so Swamiji also tells us that, through the different scriptures we have from the Rig Veda, the Bhagavatam, etc., all these examples of God, of course, having a personal form and Brahma praying to him as well. But to keep in mind is important that God's personal form is still a divine form. So it is perfect and complete. It has no defects. So it's devoid of all those defects that otherwise a material form like ours would have. And it's not made up of all those Panch Mahabhuta, the 5 great elements. Why God descends, we've seen in chapter 4. So Swamiji says here, chapter 4, verse 6, and we saw the connection to chapter 4, verse 7 as well. When there is an increase in unrighteousness, and there's a decline in righteousness. So when those are taking place, that's when God manifests himself on earth. So chapter 4, verse 7 and chapter 4, verse 6, again, it is by virtue of Yogmaya that God takes that descension. That's how he appears in this world. So keeping all that in mind, back here again, Sri Krishna descends, but even more important than that, he descends to bestow his grace upon all souls like us. And it is only through that grace which we didn't have in a prior lifetime. He may have been with us, around us in a prior lifetime, in a prior descension, in some avatar, in some personal form, but we could not recognize or see God because of our material senses and material conditioning. It's only saints who have risen well above, of course, tamogun and rajogun and even sattvagun. You get to that state of shuddha sattvagun. Eventually, that's with how the grace of God takes its form, and we are able to, of course, then see and recognize God. Mummy, I'll pass it over to you for other enlightenment and discussion.
Thank you, Gagan. First, I'll just talk about one word, that is avajananti. That means disregard. And similar to this word is another one, ajanantaha, not knowing. So what happens in not knowing, in not having full knowledge? We ignorant souls disregard. Disregard what? Many of us, we believe that God is there only in formless way. We don't understand that God descends in his personal form also. In verse number 4.6, Swamiji gave us this example from Brihadaranya Upanishad, which states, Dve vav brahmano rupe murtamam chaiv amurtamam cha. This means God appears in both ways, as the formless Brahman and as the personal God. They are both dimensions of his personality. And then in Swamiji's latest book, in Spiritual Secrets from Hinduism, here we learn a few more beautiful examples. The example first he is given is of that water, steam, and ice. Okay, this is the three manifestations of God: Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. So Bhagwan is that water roop. Okay, that is where it really quenches our thirst. Then, in another example, Swamiji has given that when we are in different gunas, how can we perceive God? Okay? Or when we think that he is formless, how do we perceive? Now, he gives an example of an ant, two ants. They are all both going up the sugar hill. One has a lump of salt in her mouth. The other one says, I had so much sugar today, so much sweetness. The one with lump of salt in her mouth says, we had gone on a salt hill. So how can you perceive God when you are in that tamogun or rajogun? Unless you move to sattvagun, you cannot experience the personal form of God. The personal form of God gives so much of joy and happiness when God displays his roop, gun, leela, dham, forms, pastimes, leelas. So the bliss of personal form of God, that is called Premanand. The formless God gives us Brahmanand. Now, Premanand, how does Swamiji explains with another example that when a lady who is expecting a child, what she goes through during those 9 months, how she feels, compared to it when she holds the baby in her lap, how she feels. That is the personal form. That is more joyous than those 9 months. So Swamiji has given us beautiful examples to understand how Bhagwan, how we like there is a matchstick. It has fire in its latent form. Until it is ignited with the ignition strip, the light doesn't come out. So similarly, it is the path of bhakti which ignites this feeling whereby we can really understand and experience the qualities of God from his Bhagavan, personal form manifestation. So here we are learning from Shri Krishna himself when he tells Arjun that he comes in his personal form. The only thing is, we deluded souls, we dim-witted souls, we are not able to recognize him. But here on this platform, we are all going to take a firm resolve that slowly, by taking baby steps, along with loads of bhajan, kirtan, meditation, Roop Dhyan, listening from scriptures, slowly we will continue. And in one of the life cycles, few life cycles down the road, we may be able to participate in Krishna's pastimes and Leelas. Over to you, Gagan.
Yeah, thank you, Mummy. And indeed, one other example also that you had presented in class, I think we both talked about it independently, was a reminder from many sources, but it's especially related to the content we had covered back in chapter 7, verses 24 and 25, I believe. So again, talking about form and formless, and I believe maybe at that stage or a little around it, we'd also covered the example specifically of the train. So like you had described in class, and it's also in the book you mentioned by Swamiji. So we have the light from afar, we have the sort of visage of a train as it's approaching, and then when it finally stops, you see the actual, coach, and even the people peering out of the windows. So again, the connection of the Brahman form to the Paramatma form or aspect to the Bhagwan aspect. So that's there. And of course, also wanted to make sure everyone saw once again, we showed at the end of class the flyer. Keep this in mind for chapter 9, verse 11. The challenge was, if you're not deluded, please step up and name everyone on the stairs with just a single name. So step here being a pun in this case, but if you just think of that descending down as stairs, just figuratively, we actually have God in both the situations. But as we are materially conditioned and deluded, we cannot recognize, of course, God in the personal form till we get that grace and that divine vision from him. So something again to keep in mind. With that, we'll wrap up this recap video. And of course, hope you all have a productive 6-7 days ahead looking at this material, also preparing for the recap quiz for next week, which will cover this chapter 9, verse 11. Go through all the content in this video and in your notes and Swamiji's commentary. And we shall see you at the same time, 8 a.m. Central and 6:30 p.m. India time on Saturday, 15th June, 2024. Till then, thank you and Radhe Radhe.
Radhe Radhe.